All right. Good morning, all. I'm talking to you today from Edinburgh in the UK, but I know many of you are joining from around the world, so I'll wish you good afternoon, good evening, and good night as well. So my name is Shona Jenkins, and I am a recent PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh, where I am involved in a project that is funded through a wider collaboration called CongoPeat, which you're going to learn more about today. So I've decided to use this opportunity today to do a few things. So firstly, I want to take the opportunity to introduce you to a beautiful peatland landscape that's found in the Central Congo Basin, which is at the core of the research that the CongoPeat project does, and an area that I'll be spending the next 3 years learning more about. And I want to introduce you and tell you a bit more about CongoPeat and this sort of unique collaboration that exists between UK and Congolese researchers and civil society and government and local partners, where we're trying to better understand how this unique peatland ecosystem functions and the possible threats that it's facing now and in the future, and what this all means down the line for what kind of policy responses one might how this sort of evidence, what this evidence brings to bear on the kinds of policies that may become implemented in the future with regards to how it's conserved and how it's managed and how it's exploited. So I don't want to spend the next 20 minutes sort of only sharing my voice, because I am I'm working on my research project, but the CongoPeat project has so many researchers. So I've also decided to integrate a few different voices in this presentation. So you're going to hear from some of the early career researchers that are involved in the CongoPeat project, and they're going to tell you a bit more about how their piece of research fits into the bigger picture of CongoPeat and why they think it's important, and sort of how they see the contributions of the research fitting into a much bigger picture. So first, I think I will take the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about my background, but I will shut my video off for now, and I want to make this sort of a visual experience. I'm going to show you some sights and sounds from the Central Congo peatlands, so you can just focus on my voice and enjoy the next 15 or so minutes. I would describe myself as a social scientist and very much an interdisciplinary researcher. So for the last 5 years or so, my background has been more related to water resources management, and also working in the area of water sanitation and hygiene. So exploring issues around ensuring universal access to safe water, dignified sanitation, and safe means of practicing sanitation, and addressing the rising issue of water insecurity in so many places around the world. And I've explored these themes that I just mentioned as a researcher and sort of from within civil society, and this work has sort of brought me across very many different contexts on the continent of Africa, from the west to the center to the east and into the Horn of Africa, in both rural and urban settings. And sort of more laterally, I took an interest in trying to understand the linkages between environmental change, local livelihoods, and how water and other natural resources are valued. And it's really that sort of interest that brought me into the CongoPeat project, where the essence of my research is trying to understand the human uses of the Central Congo Basin peatlands. And so we are going to now I'm going to show you going to walk you through a little bit the background of the CongoPeat project. I'm going to show you some pictures and some videos, and take you on a journey, as it were, through the peatlands of the Central Congo Basin. let the journey into the Cuvette Centrale Central Congo Basin peatlands begin. So we are going to start our journey on the river because there aren't a whole lot of roads in this part of the world, sort of well-paved roads, and certainly none that cut through the peatlands themselves. So we're traveling by boat right now. If we were there, if we wouldn't necessarily be traveling by a motorized boat, but if not, you would be paddling along in a traditional dugout canoe. This place, though, it seems quite remote. Thousands of people live in and around the peatlands, and if you live there, fishing is an important activity for local livelihoods, and communities, do regularly use the peatland forest resources. Though it seems at this point in time, from what we understand, that it is relatively sustainable. You find quite a lot of biodiversity in the peats. Dwarf crocodiles, gorillas, elephants, and so many other flora and fauna. To date, there is no catalogued inventory of the biodiversity found in the Cuvette Centrale peatlands, nor a complete picture of the important role the swamp forest plays in sustaining local livelihoods. So that's really it gets to the core of my research, where that's what I'm trying to better understand, the human uses of the Central Congo Basin peatlands, and how this relates to how these uses relate to biodiversity, to carbon emissions, and importantly, from a very human-centric perspective, how it is interrelated with poverty and poverty alleviation. Let's talk about the genesis of the Congo Peat Project. So where you see here on the map of Africa, the greenness here, so you have about 60% of that greenness is located in DRC, and then the rest, the other 40%, is in the Republic of Congo. So this is peat that's largely covered by vegetation, so I'm going to refer to it as the swamp forest. And so the genesis of the Congo Peat Project started with a group of scientists using knowledge and information about what they know from other tropical peatland landscapes, in combination with some reference to peat actually being found in the Central Congo Basin, to start to flesh out a scientific method for exploring and proving that indeed there is peat in this area. This is the extent, and starting to build an understanding of how important this ecosystem is and understand how it functions. So what they did was you can't assess peat using satellite data, but you can look for proxies. So you can look for environmental conditions that we know from what we know about other tropical peatlands, where you would sort of likely find peat. And so we can look at the type of vegetation that's growing on top of the peat. We can look, for example, there are areas of the peatlands in the Central Congo Basin that have a lot of palm trees growing over top, and other areas that have a lot of tall sort of hardwood trees that are growing over top. We can look for areas that have water sitting on the surface and that are waterlogged year-round, and we can also use satellite data products to detect relative topography and the compressions on the surface of the earth where water can accumulate, and peat as well. And so in total, there were about 8 different remote sensing or satellite data products. And as you'll see from some of the pictures I'll show you, sort of a field campaign was organized where they brought back data proving definitively that there was peat at various locations in the Central Congo Basin. And this was all fed into a machine learning algorithm, which essentially took all the satellite data products and all of the data from the field, ran it, processed it together, and through sort of the machine learning algorithm essentially looks at the relationship between different variables, and iteratively sort of improves upon itself to produce this final map here that you see on the screen. And what this map shows, 2 really important things. So in fuchsia is where you see the areas where there's palm trees growing on peat, and in yellow, that's where you see all those hardwoods that I was talking about before. But what this shows is that the area here is 145,500 square kilometers, which makes this the largest tropical peatland complex in the world. And just to give you sort of a better point of reference for how big that is, that's twice the size of Scotland, 14 times the size of the Gambia, and 60% of the surface area of the country of Uganda. This is enormous. And if you look down here, peat carbon stock equals 30.6 petagrams. So what this means is that there's 30.6 billion metric tons of carbon stored in the peat alone. This isn't including the vegetation, the trees growing on top. And to put that into perspective, in 2012, Verhagen et al., they produced an estimate for how much carbon was stored in the vegetation, the forest found in the entire Congo Basin. The Congo Basin, the countries included in the Congo Basin are Cameroon, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Republic of Congo, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea. That 2012 estimate was 49 petagrams, or 49 billion metric tons. And so since 2012, estimates have changed, deforestation has happened, so that number will have changed. But what this shows us, though, is that there's nearing almost the equivalent of all of the carbon stored in the vegetation in the Congo Basin countries is actually found in this peat. So let that sink in for a second. And again, this is sort of linked to my research, is understanding sort of the different interests and uses of the peatlands. So there are commercial interests, there are logging interests, there are interests for oil palm, hydrocarbons and mining interest as well. And on top of all that, there are different sort of levels of protection offered via sort of national levels of protection that you see on the left there. And then on the right, this large green area is the largest transboundary Ramsar site in the world that was recently established. So why does this matter? Because if these commercial interests go at scale, we know that this will involve peatland drainage. And we know from what we've seen in, for example, in Indonesia and parts of the Amazon, that this has really negative effects and really doesn't end well from a climate point of view, from a biodiversity point of view. And also there will be some pretty negative effects for people living in the area who are dependent on this ecosystem. So this is Greta here that you see on the screen leading that field campaign. And this is what peat looks like when you sample it from the ground. And as you'll see, this really it took literally a village and a whole family of scientists and local partners to make this, and that's what makes Congo peat tick. And so this is what it looks like to take samples of peat in the field. It's really tough work. And you'll see this moment when that's Greta Dargi there, and beside her is Professor Simon Lewis and our local partners. And this is what it looks like when you're sort of vindicated and when you apply the scientific method. And this is when they were able to show that there is indeed peat. So in 2017, at the COP in Bonn, the Minister of Environment made this statement: "We would like all humanity to understand the importance of peatlands to climate change." So you'll hear the importance and the relevance of the Congo peat research being spoken about by some of the early career researchers. All right, so now we're going to move on, and you're going to get a chance to meet some of the early career researchers that are part of the Congo Peat Project. So I had the chance to catch up with Joseph Kanyama from the University of Kisangani in DRC, and Matteo Scumbata from Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and Ovid Emba from the Bandaka Higher Pedagogical Institute in DRC. So you're going to hear these three researchers talk about the subject of their research, so from mapping vegetation to um, trying to measure fine root production and greenhouse gas fluxes in the peatlands. And you'll hear them talk about their research and how it fits into the sort of a bigger picture beyond Congo peat. And they're going to also share some of their thoughts from their experiences from working and moving through this unique peatland landscape in the Cuvette Centrale. We're going to start with hearing first from Joseph Kanyama, and he's going to talk a little bit about his background and then go on from there. So this interview is in French, but you'll see that there are subtitles available to read in English on the screen.
En tant que doctorant à l'Université de Kisangani, ma contribution, c'est que c'est pour essayer d'inventorier un peu les espèces végétales qui caractérisent cet écosystème des tourbières, des bassins du Congo, et peut-être comprendre comment ces groupements végétaux fonctionnent, parce que la végétation est liée aussi à la tourbe.
We'll now hear Joseph's views on sort of how the Congo Peat project fits into the bigger picture and what he hopes it will achieve in the next couple of years.
Et je crois que le projet Congo Peat dans son ensemble, ce que nous voulons pour l'instant, c'est pouvoir continuer les recherches dans les sites des tourbières qui ne sont pas encore explorés dans le bassin du Congo et aussi sensibiliser les politiques, la population pour la conservation de ces écosystèmes qui sont très intéressants et qui jouent un rôle dans le stockage de carbone.
And now we'll hear from Joseph just tell us why he's sort of grown interested in the vegetation that's found in the Cuvette Centrale peatlands and where his passion comes from for sort of doing his research in these swampy forest contexts.
Et après le master, je suis intéressé vraiment à la végétation des tourbières parce que c'est une végétation un peu spécifique. Ouais. Alors, je voulais comprendre cette végétation, comment les espèces végétales se comportent-elles dans la végétation où il y a permanence d'eau et comment les espèces sont réparties dans la forêt et la végétation. Donc, c'est vraiment intéressant pour moi et ça devient une passion parce que quand je ne suis pas en forêt, je pense toujours en forêt, être là, découvrir les espèces nouvelles, ainsi de suite.
We'll now hear from Oved Emba, and he's going to start off just by sort of placing the Congo Peat project into context and why it's exciting to be a scientist working in the field of biological sciences, which is how he describes his field of work, and just why so many scientists are incredibly curious about the Cuvette Centrale peatland ecosystem.
Je suis chercheur passionnant dans le domaine de la science des tourbières tropicales parce que nous savons tous que pour le moment, le réchauffement climatique pose un problème et on cherche toujours des solutions de comment atténuer. C'est pourquoi, étant scientifique, faisant partie de la science biologique, c'est toujours intéressant pour moi de faire ces recherches.
We'll now hear Ovid speak about why it's interesting and important to understand the greenhouse gas fluxes that are occurring in the peatland ecosystem and how it relates to understanding the broader functioning of the ecosystem of the peatlands in the Cuvette Centrale.
Donc, c'est toujours intéressant et important de connaître quels sont les gaz qui se trouvent dans les tourbières et comment ces gaz-là s'échangent avec l'atmosphère, comment il y a échange entre le milieu tourbé et l'environnement. C'est pourquoi mon sujet est toujours important parce qu'avec ça, on va connaître le flux de gaz à effet de serre. On verra peut-être qu'il y a aussi des paramètres qui interviennent ou qui influencent ces flux de gaz à effet de serre. Peut-être la saison, la température, l'humidité et tous ces facteurs environnementaux qui peuvent influencer les flux de ces gaz à effet de serre.
And now we're going to hear from Matteo Scumbata, and he's going to start off with his in his own words, just a description of why tropical peatlands are such rich carbon sinks, and it relates to why in the media you may read that the peatlands in the Cuvette Centrale are often referred to as a carbon bomb.
Peatlands, I've understood how these environments are really carbon rich because they accumulate lots of semi-decomposed material. So just in simple terms, these are environments that are waterlogged for most part of the year, and organic material gets trapped and doesn't decompose in this environment. So they function as sequestrating carbon, and in a way, they play an important role for regulating the climate of the world.
And now we'll hear Matteo discuss some of the different threats that the peatland ecosystem is facing from different anthropogenic drivers, and why studying fine root production is relevant and helps us better understand this unique ecosystem.
I wanted to work on tropical peatlands is because right now they're under increasing human pressure because of industrial agriculture, mining, and logging. And this made me more concerned about tropical peatlands. And well, fine root production is a fundamental component of primary productivity of plants. And some researchers, they suggest that fine root production make up 1/3 of the net primary productivity in tropical environments. And also other research claim that the peat, this semi-decomposed material that we find in tropical peatlands, may be mostly made of roots.
And now we'll hear Matteo discuss his almost dreamlike memories right now of what it was like to do his research in the Central Congo Basin peatlands. And you'll hear him mention just what a rather harsh environment it is to work in.
My memory has become a sort of a dreamlike, let's say, experience. So already is really wonderful to be in this environment. As I said, there's this lush vegetation, and you find yourself surrounded by all of these noises of animals, of birds, of insects, and then walking around, going deeply into the forest. I don't know, it's just this great feeling of being surrounded by all of this beauty, these huge trees and the colors and the vegetation, so powerful. But also I have to add that it's quite a harsh environment.
So I hope you've enjoyed this brief tour through the Central Congo Basin peatlands and learning a little bit more about the Congo Peat Project. You've heard from myself, Shona Jenkins, and from some of the other early career researchers that are working on Congo peat. And you've gotten a flavor of the diversity of research that's going on to better understand this unique ecosystem, its role in the global carbon cycle, and its role in sustaining local livelihoods, and hopefully the role that the Congo Peat Project can play in contributing to how this ecosystem is conserved and used and managed in the future.